The first time I saw her standing in the dim yellow light of the basement laundry room, I thought my exhausted mind was playing tricks on me. It was nearly midnight, the kind of hour when the building felt less like an apartment complex and more like a shipwreck full of strangers hiding behind thin walls. My basket of damp clothes dug into my arms. My back ached from a 14-hour shift, and my head was still ringing with the sound of dishes clattering and customers snapping their fingers for refills. Then I saw her, my roommate's younger sister, leaning against the old washing machine with her arms folded, like she had been waiting for me all along. She looked up slowly, her face half-shadowed, and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "I knew you'd have to come down here." In that moment, something in my chest tightened. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the strange feeling that whatever she was about to say would reach into the part of me I had spent months trying to hide from everyone, even myself. At that point in my life, I wasn't really living. I was surviving in the ugliest, most practical sense of the word. I was 28, sharing a cramped two-bedroom apartment with my college friend Marcus, because neither of us could afford to live alone. I worked double shifts at a downtown restaurant, picked up delivery orders on my days off, and spent my nights calculating which bill could be paid late without getting my electricity cut off. My father had died the year before, leaving behind hospital debt and a silence that still felt louder than any argument I'd ever had with him. My mother lived 3 hours away in a small town, pretending over the phone that she was doing fine while I pretended the same. The truth was that neither of us was okay. She had arthritis bad enough that she struggled to open jars, and I had anxiety bad enough that some mornings I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my shoes, trying to convince myself to stand up and face another day. I had once imagined a very different life for myself. I had gone to school for architecture, dreamed of designing homes that felt warm and safe, the kind of places where nobody had to flinch when the mailbox opened because it might hold another overdue notice. But dreams don't pay rent. Grief doesn't stop bills. So I traded sketchbooks for aprons, blueprints for food trays, and slowly became the kind of man who apologized when people bumped into him. Marcus knew some of it, but not all. He knew I was tired all the time. He knew I sent money to my mother every month, even when it left me with almost nothing. He knew I'd stop talking about the future because the future felt like a luxury. What he didn't know was that I had started having panic attacks in places as ordinary as grocery store aisles and bus stops. He didn't know that 2 weeks earlier I'd sat in my car in a restaurant parking lot and cried so hard I had to use my work shirt to wipe my face before going inside. And he definitely didn't know that I was one late payment away from losing the little used car that got me to work and back. Marcus's sister, Elena, had been staying with us for a few days after a rough breakup and a job interview in the city. She was 24, quiet in a way that made people assume she was shy, but I noticed quickly that she simply listened more carefully than most people spoke. She had a habit of watching people as if she could hear the things they weren't saying. During dinner, she'd ask simple questions. How was work? How long have you lived here? Do you ever sleep? And somehow those questions felt less like conversation and more like concern. I tried to keep my distance, partly because I was always working and partly because there was something unsettling about being seen when you've worked hard to become invisible. That night in the laundry room, I set my basket down and forced a tired laugh, asking what she was doing awake. But Elena didn't smile back. She took a small step toward me, and in her hands was a folded envelope. She said Marcus had fallen asleep on the couch, and she didn't want him to hear this because she knew I'd be embarrassed. Then she held out the envelope and said she had found it on the kitchen counter when she was looking for a pen. It was the final notice from my car loan company, the one I thought I had shoved under a pile of junk mail before anyone could see it. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like missing a stair in the dark. I reached for the envelope, but she didn't let go right away. Instead, she looked at me with a kind of calm sadness that made it impossible to lie. She told me she wasn't trying to invade my privacy. She had just recognized the look on my face because she had worn it herself. She said there was a time when she smiled through every family dinner, every coffee date, every "how are you," while secretly wondering how much more pressure a person could take before they cracked. And then she said the thing that undid me. She told me I didn't look tired anymore. I looked lonely. No one had ever said that to me before. People called me hardworking, responsible, quiet, reliable. But lonely? Lonely was too accurate, too intimate. It was the word for eating dinner over the sink, because sitting at the table reminded you of who wasn't there. It was the word for hearing your phone buzz and hoping, for one stupid second, that it was your father calling from the hardware store asking if you needed anything. It was the word for being surrounded by customers, coworkers, buses, traffic, and still feeling like your life was happening behind a glass wall no one could see through. I tried to brush it off, but my voice broke halfway through the sentence. Elena must have heard it because her expression softened, and before I knew it, I was sitting on top of a dryer with my head in my hands, telling a near stranger things I hadn't told my best friend. I told her about my father, about the hospital bills, about the architecture degree I'd never used, about how ashamed I felt every time my mother thanked me for sending money I could barely spare. I told her that I was so tired of being one emergency away from disaster that sometimes I fantasized about getting in my car and driving until the road ran out. I even admitted something I had never said aloud, that I was terrified I had already become the small, defeated version of myself I used to pity when I was younger. Elena didn't interrupt. She just sat across from me on an upside-down detergent bucket, listening like every word mattered. If this story is touching your heart so far, take 1 second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this are for everyone carrying pain quietly, and your support helps these moments reach the people who need them most. When I finally stopped talking, the basement had gone still except for the slow churn of the washing machine. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather folder. Inside were copies of sketches, resumes, and a business card from an architecture firm across town. She explained that the job interview she had come to the city for wasn't actually for herself. She worked as an assistant at a small design nonprofit in another state, one that renovated affordable housing and helped young architects build portfolios through community projects. She had overheard Marcus once mention that I used to draw buildings in college, so while she'd been in town, she'd done some digging. The firm on the card had a junior design opening, and she had convinced one of the project managers to at least look at my old work if I was willing to meet him. She said she hadn't planned to interfere, but when she saw the final notice on the counter, she knew waiting politely would be the same as doing nothing. I stared at her like she had just spoken another language. It had been so long since anyone brought me an opportunity instead of a problem that I didn't know how to receive it. My first reaction was embarrassment. My second was anger, though not at her, at the fact that hope itself had started to feel humiliating. I told her it was too late. I hadn't designed anything in years. I was behind on bills, exhausted, out of practice, and probably not good enough anymore. Elena nodded as if she had expected every one of those objections. Then she said something I have carried with me ever since. She said, "You keep talking like your life is a room you got locked inside. But some doors don't open because you're strong. They open because you finally admit you can't keep doing this alone." That night, she made coffee at 1 a.m. and sat beside me at the kitchen table while I dug through old boxes from my college portfolio. My hand shook as I spread faded sketches across the table. Tiny apartment layouts, hand-drawn elevations, notes in the margins from professors who used to believe in me before I forgot how. Elena helped me photograph everything, update my resume, and write an email to the project manager before I could lose my nerve. For the first time in months, maybe years, I stayed awake not because I was worried, but because something inside me had started to stir. The next few weeks weren't magically easy. I still worked doubles. I still had overdue bills. My mother still needed help. But now there was movement where there had only been dread. The architecture firm brought me in for a trial contract, helping with draft revisions for a low-income housing project. The pay wasn't huge, but it was enough to keep my car. More importantly, it reminded me that the part of me I thought had died was still there, buried under grief and fatigue, waiting for someone to call it back to life. I started sketching again at night. I started talking to Marcus honestly. I even told my mother the truth about how hard things had been. And instead of sounding disappointed, she sounded relieved, as if she had been waiting for me to stop pretending too. Months later, when I stood inside a half-finished housing complex that I had helped design, I thought about that basement laundry room. About fluorescent lights and damp concrete floors and the low hum of machines. About how strange it was that the night I felt most broken was the night someone found me and refused to let me disappear inside my own silence. Elena went back home eventually, but not before becoming one of the most important people in my life. Not because she saved me in some dramatic movie scene way, but because she did something rarer. She noticed. She paid attention to the cracks I was trying to hide and treated them like something worth tending, not something to be ashamed of. If you've ever gone through a season where you look fine on the outside, but were falling apart inside, right? I kept going in the comments. Someone reading it may realize they're not alone tonight. I used to think life changed in grand moments, in promotions, weddings, funerals, big speeches, huge losses. But now I know some of the most important turning points happen in ordinary places. A parking lot, a kitchen table, a basement laundry room in an old apartment building. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with answers. Sometimes it begins with one person seeing your pain clearly and refusing to walk past it. And sometimes the sentence that changes your life isn't something poetic or perfect. Sometimes it's just a whisper in the middle of a night from someone who somehow knew you were running out of strength. I knew you'd have to come down here. If this story moved you even a little, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can find these stories when they need them most. And remember this, being strong does not mean carrying everything alone. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is let someone stand beside them in the room where they almost gave up.